Hello and welcome to Relatable Code. In this video, we will discuss decision making in Kotlin. This will involve some logical operators, comparison operators, in addition to if-else statements. So let's get started. Okay, so our one and only customer walks into our library and wants to borrow a book. We want to check whether or not we can let this customer borrow a book. And how can we do that? We need to store some type of information in our system to check whether or not we can let this customer borrow this book. And we can do it like this. We can create a variable. We can name it var can borrow. Can borrow. And we need to give it a value. Based on what can we let our customer borrow a book? Let's say we want to check the account balance of this customer. So we want to say can borrow book is related to account balance, for example, being greater than 20. This is how you do a check to see if you can let this customer borrow a book or not. Let's print out the statement. So we write print line can borrow. Let's print it out. Okay, it's building, and here we have false. So in this case, our customer can't borrow this book. And with the same way, you can do multiple checks. Here we're just checking if the customer has an account balance that's greater than 20. Okay, we can do something like can borrow equal account balance. We can say greater than or equal to 20, and we write it like this: greater than or equal to 20. Okay, that's another operator that we can use. It's a comparison operator. So we use two comparison operators, the greater than and the greater than or equal. Okay, this one is exclusive, which means 20 is not included, and in this one 20 is included. Okay, so in the example that I gave you, we were able to check whether or not we were able to let this customer borrow a book. In order to make it simpler, if you want, let's change the print line statement to something like can this customer borrow a book? Okay, that's a print line statement, and at the end we want to check can borrow. How we do that? We can just write the $sign can borrow. Let me show you how it works. Can this customer borrow a book? False. So when this customer comes to the library, we can just run this code and check whether or not we can let him have this book. Our condition was that his account balance be greater than 20, and in the second condition, greater than or equal to 20. Okay, so this is the one that we're checking since it's the second statement and the last statement. Let's do something else for another comparison operator. Okay, remember when we were talking about the fees, whether or not we will give the customer a discount for the fees. Let's try to do this with some comparison operators. Okay, so we have number of days with overdue book, which is basically the number of days that the customer is late to return the book. So we can create a variable, for example, can have a discount, equals, what is the condition in this case? It's number of days with overdue book less than 7. Okay, number of days with overdue book less than 7. So what will we do in this case? We will just do another print line statement. Print line customer is eligible for a discount, and we try to print the value of can have discount like this: can have discount. Okay, when you use the $sign, it means you want to print out the literal value of this variable. Okay, if you omit the dollar sign and you try to run your code, you can see here in the output window, can this customer borrow a book? Can borrow. It's translated literally. But if you use the dollar sign and you try to run the code, it will now be translated to false. Why false? Because it is the value of can borrow. Why? Because can borrow necessitates that account balance be greater than or equal to 20. In our case, account balance was 20, but then some fees were subtracted from the account balance. Okay, I hope that's clear. And for the second case, we're trying to figure out if the customer is eligible for a discount after he returns the book. So we print out the statement, customer is eligible for a discount, false. Okay, so we don't give a customer the discount in this case. We can also write less than or equal. Okay, we don't use the var keyword again because we already declared this variable here. So we're only changing the value of this variable using the equal sign in this statement. So can have discount now equals number of days with overdue book less than or equals to 7. Okay, this will have the same impact since the number of days with overdue book was 20. Okay, if I change this to 5, for example, and I try to run my code, in this case, it's true. So when the customer, in this case, returns the book, I tell this customer that he is eligible for a discount. Okay, so I showed you 4 operators: the greater than operator, the greater than or equal operator, the less than operator, and the less than or equal operator. Okay, let's check 2 more operators. Let's go back to can borrow. So I'm going to write can borrow equals, I want to check whether or not this customer has a borrowed book or not. Okay, we already have a variable var borrowed book equal math book. So if the customer doesn't have any borrowed book, he would have an empty string for this variable. Okay, in this case the customer doesn't have any borrowed book. So how can we check for that? We can do it like this. Can borrow, our variable that can decide whether or not this customer can borrow a new book, will be equal to borrowed book, but in this case we need a boolean. Okay, so borrowed book equals empty string. And why did I use a double equals instead of a single equals? Because when you use a single equals, you're trying to assign a new value to this variable, like what we're doing with the can borrow variable. Okay, what did I do here? Okay, so if I check can borrow equal borrowed book equal empty string, I'm declaring or I'm assigning a new value to this variable can borrow, and I'm checking if borrowed book is equal to empty string. In this case, the customer doesn't have any borrowed book and he or she is eligible to borrow a new book. Let's delete our previous print line statements and write a new one. So print line, this customer can borrow a new book. Can borrow. Okay, so if this is true, the customer can borrow a new book, and if it's false, the customer can borrow a new book. So in this case, it looks like it's false. Wow. Borrowed book equal empty string. Oh, okay, because we then reassign borrowed book to become science book. Let's try to make this an empty string as well, or delete it altogether. Let's check. Now we run our program. This customer can borrow a new book, true. Okay, because borrowed book had an initial value of empty string, it had another value here of science book, so science book is not equal to empty string, which is why it displayed false. Okay, when we deleted that science book statement, it was true again. So this customer can borrow a new book. Okay, that's the fifth comparison operator. I'm going to show you the final one that we will work with. And it can be written like this. We already have a value, has overdue books. So let's write something like can borrow equal. We want to check if this customer doesn't have any overdue books. So we write has overdue books different than or equal to true. What this means is we're checking if this customer doesn't have any overdue books. Okay, if we wrote equal true, we're checking if this customer has overdue books, and if we wrote different than or equal to true, we're checking if this customer doesn't have any overdue books. Let's print it out. We delete the previous print statement and we write print line. This customer can borrow new book, a new book, because we're not weird people. Can borrow. Let's try to print it out. This customer can borrow a new book, false. We tell this customer you can't borrow a new book. Why? Because it necessitates that has overdue books is different than true. In our case, has overdue books was true. Okay, so when we check if it's not equal to true, it will return false. What if has overdue books was false? Basically, it will get reverted when we try the statement. So if we try to run our program again, this customer can borrow a new book, true. Why is that? Because it had a value of false and we're checking the opposite of false. So we're checking for true. Okay, I hope that was clear. And if you notice, this is a Boolean value. This is also a Boolean value. Same thing goes for this value and this value and this one and this one as well. How can we make sure? We hover over can have discount and it's indeed a Boolean value. Okay, I hope that was clear. And now we're going to check some logical operators. So if we hover over has overdue books different than or equal to true, it's telling us condition has overdue books is always false. How can we write that in another way? We can do that like this. We can write can borrow equal not has overdue books. So we're checking if this customer doesn't have any overdue books, and we can do it like that. This is the not operator and it's an exclamation mark. Okay, so now we can just write this print statement below. We can run our program again. Has overdue books is false, so we're checking for the opposite of false, which is in this case true. Okay, that's one of the logical operators, and we have two more. Okay, now what if we want to do a combination of two conditions? How can we do that? For example, with respect to can borrow, I want to check if this customer doesn't have any borrowed book at the moment, and I also want to check if this customer has an account balance that's greater than or equal to 20. I want both of these conditions to be satisfied and true so that I can let this customer borrow a book, and this is how we do it. Okay, so we write can borrow equals first condition is borrowed book equals empty string, which means this customer doesn't have a borrowed book. And how can we write that? We write the double and sign. Account balance is greater than or equal to 20. Now we're checking for two conditions to be true at the same time. Okay, if one of these conditions is false, this value for can borrow is also false. Both of them have to be true for the value of can borrow to be true. So we write print line, this customer can borrow a new book, can borrow, as we did previously. We run this code and it's false. Why is it false? Borrowed book is an empty string. This customer doesn't have any borrowed book, but the customer's account balance had some fees deducted from it. Okay, that's why the second condition was false, and as a result the value of can borrow was also false. What if we wrote account balance greater than or equal to 10? Let's run it. It's also false. That's weird. I don't know how much fees we deducted from it. Let's try to print out account balance. Print line account balance. Let's run it again. It's 8.75. What a coincidence. Let's write greater than or equal to 5. Okay, this is how you can debug your code as well. We will make, of course, another section for debugging. Let's delete this print statement and let's run this code again. Now it should return true because the first condition is true and the second condition is also true. That's how you check for two conditions to be true at the same time, or in other words, the AND operator. Okay, you also have another operator called the OR operator, and this is how you use it. That's the OR operator. So it's enough for one of these two conditions to be true so that can borrow can have a value that's true as well. Okay, let's set account balance again to be greater than or equal to 20. We know that it's 8.75, but I want to show you the OR operator. In this case, we run our code. And again, this customer can borrow a new book. This is true. Okay, because borrowed book was an empty string, so this customer doesn't have any borrowed book. And we don't have to look at the second condition because in this case, the first condition was true. This is the OR operator. It only requires one of the two or more conditions to be true. Okay, so that the value of can borrow can be true as well. But I don't want to write a single print line statement. I want to write a print line statement if can borrow is true, and I want to write another one if can borrow was false. How can we do that? We have to use an if-else condition. So the if-else condition block is basically one way that we can do decision making in Kotlin. And how we write that? We write if, and between these two parentheses, we write our condition. What is the condition? It's basically a Boolean value. In this case, it's can borrow. Okay, so if can borrow, print line, let's lend this customer a new book. Okay, we can let him borrow a new book in this case. And if it's not true, this code between these two curly braces gets executed if the condition between these two parentheses is true. If it's not true, this code will get executed inside the else statement between these two curly braces. This is the code that will get executed in case can borrow is false. Okay, so we write a print line statement, another one. We say this customer can't borrow a new book. Let's delete the old one and I'll show you how this works. Okay, we run our main function again. So in the output we have let's lend this customer a new book. Why? Because can borrow is true, because we're checking if this customer doesn't have any book currently that's borrowed, or if the account balance for this customer is greater than or equal to 20. What if we were to use and, in this case, the double and sign, which is the and operator? So this customer can't borrow a new book anymore. Okay, because this condition is now false. The code inside the else block is now triggered. Okay, so now I want you to create a new variable. I want a variable to check whether or not we should call this customer. Okay, and two conditions have to be true so that we can call this customer. The first condition is number of days with overdue book has to be greater than 7. And at the same time, the account balance should be less than 10. Okay, I want you to do an if-else statement, and I want you to print out a statement for both cases, whether we should call this customer or not. Okay, take your time to do this, pause this video, and we'll continue after that. Okay, so let's do that assignment. We write var should call customer, and it's equal to number of days with overdue book greater than 7, and because both conditions have to be true at the same time, account balance less than 10. If these two conditions are true, we should definitely call this customer, maybe to pass by the library and pay the fees that he has to pay. Okay, let's get that into an if-else statement. So we write if should call customer, print line call your customer, else print line don't call the customer. Let's run this function again. So don't call the customer. That's the decision that's made by the library. Why? Because number of days with overdue book, let's control left click on this variable. It's equal to 5, which is less than 7. Okay, so one of these two conditions is false, which means should call customer is also false. So this code here doesn't get triggered. Instead, this code gets triggered. That's why you see in the output window, don't call customer. Okay, so if else statements can be written like that, and you can also do some more checks. It doesn't have to be a single check here. What if we want to do something like, for example, if should call customer, we just copy and paste that code. Else, we want to check for another condition. How can we do that? We write else if, for example, number of days with overdue book is less than 7, and account balance is less than 10. What do we want to do in this case? We just say prepare to call customer. Okay, this customer hasn't had an overdue book for 7 days yet, but we just want to keep note that we might call this customer in the future. So we write print line prepare to call customer, and if also we want to check for another condition, the default condition in this case, we write else. Okay, In this case, we just don't call the customer. We write it like that. Let's delete the previous statement and run our code again. In this case, we have prepare to call customer. Why? Because number of days with overdue book was equal to 5. So should call customer was false, and this code wasn't executed. We check the second statement. We have another if statement here. We're checking if number of days with overdue book was less than 7, which is true because it's 5. And we're checking for another condition, which is account balance is less than 10. In our case, it was 8.75, if you remember. Okay, so both these conditions are true, and this code will get triggered in this case, prepare to call customer. Okay, let's change it a little bit. Let's say account balance initially was like, I don't know, 50. Let's run our code again. In this case, we just don't call the customer. Okay, because number of days with overdue book was 5, which is less than 7, but account balance wasn't less than 10. Okay, so this code wasn't going to get triggered. Instead, this code is going to get triggered because the above two conditions were both false. So this condition or this block of code will get triggered. In this case, don't call customer. Okay, I hope that wasn't too complex. I tried to give you an example for our library so that you can find it kind of relatable. Okay, if you find my explanation and my code to be relatable, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content, and I'll see you in the next video.